Welcome back, amateurs, and welcome to my Amateurish podcast. Today we are talking about Maslow and his universal hierarchy of needs. Let's jump into it. When I really need to take a mental health break, and lately that's been the case, I find that I learn the most by taking that break and really learning to do a lot of introspection. And honestly, I am quite literally that person that is classified as an overthinker. And I don't think it could get much simpler than that. 90% of the time am overthinking a lot of my situations, and that induces my anxiety, and it's a downward spiral of mixture of anxiety and depression about stuff that's I always think is out of my control. And really, the only thing that's out of my control is the neurological functions of how my brain works and what causes the actual physical function of my depression. Short of that, it's when I was born, when I die, and the government ruling of my country. So, other than that, everything else that I do, everything else that I do is 100% within my control. And honestly, I think about that a lot. And I think we kind of forget that sometimes. And that's the whole point of today's video, is to really take back into, well, not only to share my personal experience, but also my little bit of expertise in the subject, and to get you, the viewer, as well, to start listening in on and talking about your personal needs and your wants and what you can control in your life and how to change the parts of your life that you don't like because they inevitably suck. Um, so yeah, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to keep posting the unedited versions of these videos, or minimal edits, and use them on my podcast. I feel like I can reach a wider audience, and I think that's the direction I want to go. So, if you're listening here on the podcast, thanks for joining. And if you're not on the podcast and you're on my YouTube channel, this is a very edited version. This video is more meant to be very systematic and give you a action plan. That's the goal of what these videos are going to be from now on, is giving you action plans on how to tackle your problems. And if you want to have more discussion type based content, you can go over to the podcast channel, Amateurish. It's also got a YouTube channel and Instagram if you'd like to follow that down below. But we're going to jump into it. So today, if you watched the last video I put out, which was Understanding Personal Development, what it was about, we were discussing how everyone has their own hierarchy of needs and what it was about. And we didn't really get too much into it because I wanted it to be for a whole entire video, because honestly, we can go through lengthy discussions about just this one theory. And honestly, I'm excited to do this, so we're going to jump into it. So, I find that as a content creator, especially nowadays, I'm finding it hard not to constantly reshift my priorities in order to make what I want to happen, especially with that being a full-time content creator and speaking about things that I'm passionate about and getting through to at least that one person that would make a difference. And honestly, it's probably one of the hardest things to do when I'm not mentally healthy. And lately, I've been going down a spiral. I'm going to be completely transparent about that. I've been going through a little bit of a spiral. And I'm getting on the other side of that hump. And there's sometimes where I can pinpoint it and sometimes where I can't. I think this point's more just like a new form of transformation in my life that I wasn't fully prepared for mentally, and my brain freaked out on me. So, yeah. Anyway, I want to talk about more the fact of introspection and what it has to do with the hierarchy of needs in individuals' lives, especially your own as you're viewing this or listening to it. I find introspection to be very, very important. It's a huge part of what makes us as individuals very passionate and open, and often makes us reflect about what is important to us and what isn't, and oftentimes what we're very dramatic over and really what we think we can't control and we actually can't. So we're multitasking here today. We're making two videos on the same content, and that's fine. But for you, the viewers, I want to challenge you to take the information here today and work on it for yourself. Really listen to what we're talking about today and go out and figure out what fits your needs and what the difference is between your needs and wants. And really just go ahead and do the homework. So we're going to jump into it and then I'll explain a little bit more later. So I know I said this in the last video, but I'm going to quickly go back over what the hierarchy of needs is and why it's important. Many people don't actually know what the hierarchy of needs are. I really don't think many people would unless they were studying to become a teacher or they were studying to become a psychologist or in some kind of healthcare or I would say healthcare, caring for others, caregiving field at some point. They probably would never have heard of it. But if you have, great. That makes my job easier. If you haven't, and you didn't watch my previous video, which is linked up below, which is linked above, if you would like to go check that out. But the hierarchy of needs was a theory developed by this guy, Abraham Maslow, and Abraham Maslow is this great psychologist who studied a lot on the positivity of the psyche, and he was one of the founding fathers of basic humanistic psychology. And what I love about this theory is that it's so, like many things in life, blatantly obvious, and yet we overcomplicate it so easily. So his theory in the hierarchy of needs is a pyramid-shaped theory, which is a physical description. If you type it up in the internet, you can. It's a triangle that has three basic functions of humanistic needs, and then that is divided up into, I think, 5 or 6 tiers. I think it's 5. I have written down here that, the theory of the hierarchy of needs was developed by Abraham Maslow, who was born in 1908 and died at 1970. He was a psychologist who held a deep fascination for the field of positive psychology and mental health, and he was a mental health advocate. By the end of his years, he obtained 3 degrees from the University of Wisconsin and developed the name for himself as one of the founding fathers of humanistic psychology. His main primary focus was about this theory of wants, the theory of needs, and what the hierarchy of that was, but more importantly about the top tier of self-actualization, which we'll get into in a minute. But I think the big thing to note is that the difference between Maslow's theories and that of behaviorists like Freud. The biggest thing about Maslow compared to the natural behaviorists of the Freudian time and Freud himself, behaviorists often found themselves paying more attention to the negative psyche and the psychology behind negative behaviorism. And Maslow instead was more focused on the positive aspects. He was an advocate for mental health and mental health advocacy, and he really was like that. I don't know how to give you an accurate analogy, but you ever had that one really great high school teacher that just you would always go talk to in lunch and would give you the best advice, and he always told you you could be anything and everything and always put you up on a high pedestal and forced you to be better and do better, and you wanted to be because of his confidence in you? That's the rounded personality of Maslow and his theories. He was very big into this idea of we always had a greater purpose and we always needed to meet our basic needs before we could get there. And that was the journey of life, was that we were always seeking to get to another goal and another aim. but if we neglected ourselves, we went back down a few steps. And this is where, self-care culture gets a little twisted now. And I'm going to have many videos on later because I have this whole idea about self-care that I want to talk about later, but isn't appropriate for this video or isn't appropriate for this episode. So I wanted to go into a little bit of detail into the hierarchy of needs and really get into it a lot deeper than what we did last time. So as you can see from Maslow's pyramid, we have the three basic groups. There's three basic groupings of the pyramid. One of them are the basic needs. The other is our psychological needs. And the other is our social needs. And so we're going to break this down into a little bit further. So the first here is the first part of the groupings is the basic needs. This first one is the physiological needs. This is your, food, water, warmth, sex, sleep, shelter, those very basic needs. And depending on which images you're looking up at Google or whatever gives you, some of them have been varied. Some of them are very, very basic. And this is why I say it varies depending on the person who's meeting their needs. And it's not something just as cut and dry as like, oh, I need X, Y, and Z. Sometimes it's a little different. And it's bound to change throughout your life. Sometimes you're higher up on your pyramid and sometimes you're a little lower, and that's okay. But people don't often recognize that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Oftentimes, we're much lower on the rung than I think we are, and we are not meeting our most physiological needs. And instead, we're trying to scrape our way up the pyramid and meet our self-actualization needs. And instead, we should be focusing on the bottom. So the second tier is our safety needs. It's our sense of security, sense of safety. I have down here employment, housing, health, financial security, feeling that we have proper well-being and safety measures for our community, that kind of stuff. A lot of it's about surrounding yourself in a home, in a community, in your government, in a very wide and vague spectrum. The third tier is about love. And this is one where we're going back. I can probably hear a few comments coming in that'd be like, well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you said the physiological need, one of them was sex. Yes, sex is a physiological need. It's something that we do as humans. It's very primal and animalistic. It's very low on the rung. When you get to love, it's that third tier. It's this feeling of more than just sex. It's not about the sex. It's about, friendship, intimacy, trust, acceptance, receiving and giving affection. And that's what love's about. It's not always romanticized, which we have a very toxic belief in nowadays in public culture and pop culture. But it's about being connected in a community more so than romance. And it's hard with flex culture nowadays because we're so wrapped around this idea of what we're supposed to have. And a lot of it is very much linked to the 1%. Everything that entails, which is flex culture in itself. And it's tied to sex, and a lot of stuff is. And it's the idea of sex appeal rather than it's hard because the way, and we'll probably get into a whole video about this, but the problem with the flex culture is that it's focusing on the two opposite ends of the spectrum instead of meeting in the middle. Instead of meeting at the third tier of love and having a community, flex culture is more about meeting the bottom tier of having sex and the sex appeal and the positivity and the sexiness of flex culture is what I'm talking about. Is the bottom tier of having sex and the top tier of having self-confidence. And where those get intertwined is where we get flex culture and the sex appeal genre that we get now. And it's very messed up when you think about it because it's two ends of the spectrum and you can't have both regulating at the same time because you haven't even met the bottom rung properly and mastered it. But again, we'll get into that. So that's where we were in a little bit of safety and security, and this one falls in the next one tier 4 falls into that, but also the third tier of like confidence and respect. And it's about the psyche. The fourth tier is about esteem. And it's not necessarily like self-esteem, like feeling good and comfortable in your own skin and about yourself. It's about esteem for yourself, meaning like dignity, achievement, mastery of your skills, and feeling that you are self held together and confident. And a sense of independence, which is very hard because when you're a child, your lower needs are met much easier 90% of the time. I would say majority of the time, your lower needs are met easier because someone is giving it to you. And you're working on this identity of esteem and self-actualization. And then when you become an adult and you now have to focus on your basic needs, and if you don't know how to do that, you're now still trying to figure out who you are on the top tiers, but now you have to take a few steps back as well. And we're not programmed or built to multitask that way. We're meant to focus on the single action of taking care of ourselves one step at a time and then slowly moving forward. So when you get new adults that go to college for the first time and have never done laundry, never cooked a meal for themselves, that kind of stuff, they go through a really hard time. And I honestly think this is part of what makes really bad, freshy depression is what I call it, when I joke around with my sister. But the freshman depression, which is why I say that it's very rhymey, is toxic. And a lot of it has to do with how some of the children were raised. And it's immediately, majority of them are just thrown into adulthood or thrown into a sense of freedom and individuality that they're not prepared for. And even if they know how to do the basic needs of like cooking for themselves and cleaning themselves and wiping their own ass, they're not ready yet for what it means to maintain. They can do those every once in a while, but that's often why we see, teenagers have messy rooms. Unless they're held at a standard to maintain for themselves for long periods of time when they're younger and taught to be individualistic when they're young, they don't really seem to have a great understanding of that and kind of freak out and regress in college and a new adulthood. So the fifth one and the top tier, which is another theory in itself of Maslow's, and it's the self-actualization tier, and it's surrounded upon this idea of, oh, I forgot, let me go back. Tier 4 also has a lot of parts to it that are about, respect and status, and this is where we get the line drawn 90% of the time of selfless and selfishness that many people don't know what to do. And again, this is where we see the line drawn with flex culture is like it seems much easier to maintain a healthy habit or to feel happy and get a sense of like, serotonin, dopamine, whatever, because they're used to gaining status nowadays, especially with social media and the flex culture. But a lot of that is because they're still not mentally mature enough or high enough on the pyramid to go back and work on the basic needs that they already have and haven't been working on. But a lot of that is a big part of what's part of the problem. So the fifth tier is self-actualization. It's the top tier of the hierarchy, the top pinpoint of the pyramid. And it refers to someone's passion, purpose, self-confidence. The ego is surrounded in this. It's a lot of where problem-solving, experience, and growth is. And what we see a lot of times is that people will jump from all the tiers very quickly and then hop right back down. And this is where depression, I think, is a big part of it. They shoot up and shoot down very quickly. It's like the equivalent to a drug high. And if you don't maintain that high at the self-actualization, then you have a burnout and you crash. And what I think is a lot easier is for people to, it's much more efficient for people to go from the bottom and slowly work their way up to each tier and build over time and get a sense of mastery before they're really at the top tier and successfully maintaining that for long periods of time. You'll always fail. You'll always fail, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there is a problem with the up and down instability of going up and down the hierarchy. And honestly, a lot of that is why we don't see a lot of people maturing fast enough, and a lot of people are not. It's why we don't see a lot of people maturing fast enough, and they're not being able to regulate themselves because they're going too fast up and down the pyramid instead of taking one step and gaining one step. They're jumping from the top to the bottom and not doing the middle work. Um, And at the top of this as well is where we see a lot of the peak experiences. It's where you have those bursts of energy, where we have those bursts of creativity that we're just like, I'm feeling inspired in the moment. And that's where you're hitting your self actualization. But when you're not maintaining everything else, you're only going to have that for such a short while. And then you will immediately regress. And then you feel like crap again. And it's such a hard thing to master, but I think it has a lot to do with how we handle parenting and teaching younger individuals on how to regulate themselves in their lives. So now, debatably, I want to make this part the most important part of the discussion is like understanding. I want to impose on you the parts of my wisdom or my experience that I feel can better help you with your own hierarchy of needs as a viewer, listener, whomever. And this is the order I think you should try. And please do actually give it a try. Be serious and honest and vulnerable about it. It's the only way for you to grow and change your life. This is how I would do it, in my opinion. The first is you want to better understand the hierarchy of needs, which is why you're obviously watching this video. You want to make a change in your life. That's fine. The second is you want to access your specific needs and wants. The best way to do that is honestly, there's printables out there. Shit, I could make one if you really wanted to. There's probably printables out there. You could easily just do this on a sheet of paper and draw a triangle and go ahead and divide the tiers up and write what's most important to you in those themes in as specific or as vague as you want. And once you've accessed those needs, you can write down anytime you feel like there's something you want to add, but no, it's not fitting within the requirements, add it to a side list, and that's called a want. To understand your needs and your wants and how they differ is going to help you a lot in where you want to and will need to compromise in your wants and focusing more on your needs. Because if you're compromising on your needs instead of your wants and just getting all of your wants, you're not going to grow. You're essentially spoiling yourself. And it's not teaching you anything. If you're getting all your needs out of the way first and then you have the luxury of having your wants in the end, it's a longer, more patient game, but it is something that does teach you more in the end. And I can't give you specifics on that. It's very tailored to a personal experience in your own life. All I can do is give you this advice. But the third bit of advice that you've heard me say quite a bit in this episode is you want to start slow from the beginning of your tiers after you've assessed them and work your way up slowly. It's not something you can do over a day or even a week or hell, even a month. I would honestly say make it a resolution, work really hard at it, and assess yourself every 6 months. Or even every month, who knows? If you're regularly assessing yourself and where you're at in your goals and seeing that you're meeting your needs. I know some people that do this daily and don't actually know that they're doing it. They assess themselves and seeing that they're fed and watered like a plant or an animal, and just meeting their most basic needs. And then they slowly move up throughout the day of like calling a loved one. It's like a small list of goals that you can do as well, and meeting your most basic needs. Um, the fourth bit of advice that ties into the third is that you want to master your tier before you move up. Um, Everyone is different. You're going to have a different timeline than others. And excuse me, I'm very gassy. The biggest part about the mastery portion is that you're going to want to understand that it's something more than just. Here's an example. If you're feeling very icky, icky, that's a great term. If you feel like your anxiety, depression is kicking in, or you just feel like you're having a very off day, go to the most bottom rung. Go feed yourself, give yourself proper nutrition, eat something clean and healthy, do a little bit of exercise, even if it's just moving somewhere, get off the couch, off the phone, put away the electronics, have a little bit of sex. um, get yourself something cozy, or if it's too hot, get yourself cooled down, regulate your body temperature, and then move on to the next step. When you've done the most basic needs, then you can move up. And you could do that on a daily basis. But if you're not mastering that on a large scale, like you're not maintaining eating cleanly for very long periods of time, like more than just like a 30-day challenge, but more than like a year, 2 years, 3 years, very long, extensive periods of time, and you're drinking lots of water. And challenges are a good way to do that. It's a way to trick your brain into thinking you're doing something fun when in actuality you're meeting your most basic needs. And you're going to want to do those things for very long periods of time, and then you can move on into the next year. And some people take very long to do that. Some people take a very short time to do that. Some people are in the middle. It just depends on you and your dedication to what you need. The fifth part that is very important is that you're going to fail. I say this in almost every video, you're going to fail. It's okay. Failure is the part of growth. It's the key part of growth. Failure and patience and having faith and having the hard work and dedication to something is the only way for you to grow and persevere. And the most important part is that you're going to fail. And that's not meant to discourage you from even trying. It's that it's inevitable. Let it go. Failure is inevitable. You will fail at something. If it's not this, it's something else. But it's almost always tied to the hierarchy of needs. You're going to fail one of your needs. Try again. If it means that you go to the bottom rung again, just feed yourself. Get yourself some food, some water, healthiness. Don't binge, but be healthy. Then move to the next tier and slowly build your way back up again until you try. And if you fail again, you try again. And eventually you'll succeed. And then the sixth part is just with that trial and error and final success is having faith that you're going to be able to do it someday, but also have the patience upon yourself to let yourself time to grow. I find that very hard for me. I'm very patient for everyone else, but very impatient for myself. It's something we all need to practice on. There's always something. But if you don't have the patience and the faith, you're not going to persevere. You need to be able to maintain this stuff long term, and that takes a lot of patience, and you need to have the faith that you will eventually succeed even if you fail now. Everything in the end will be just fine. But regardless, I have resources down below if you would like to go check those out. And if you're not already, please go ahead and follow the podcast or hit subscribe on the YouTube channels. I have one that's just under my name, and the other one is Amateurish podcast. You can find that by typing in the search engine or just looking us up on Google. My podcast is also on Spotify if you'd like that, or anywhere else you like to listen. I don't believe I'm on Apple products yet, but we're getting there. So until next time, I will see you all later, and I hope this information was invaluable to you. But I will see you next time. Bye.